Why did everyone stop talking the moment she stepped off the transport? The desert heat shimmered across Camp Pendleton, blurring the horizon in waves of gold and dust. The hum of engines faded behind her as Corporal Riannan Vex adjusted the rifle case slung across her shoulders, a case that drew more attention than she ever wanted. It wasn't the shape that made heads turn. It was the paint, a lattice of delicate pink roses curling across the matte black surface like vines growing through steel. Within seconds the stares began, the whispers, the laughter that always followed her from one base to another. "That's what we're getting now," Sergeant Brock Dunham's voice carried across the yard, his arms crossed over a chest built like a bunker. "They're sending florists instead of shooters." The Marines standing nearby erupted in quick, sharp laughter, the kind that tried to sound harmless but carried a familiar edge, the kind that cut. Riannan didn't flinch. She didn't glare, she didn't even look their way. She just walked, eyes forward, pace steady, the sun throwing a hard glare across her pale green eyes. Every step she took was deliberate, controlled. She'd been through this scene too many times before. A younger Marine jogged up beside her, Lance Corporal Mathers, all energy and curiosity. "Hey, is that really your rifle, or us some kind of charity thing?" "It's my rifle," she said simply, her voice even, steady. "Standard issue M4A6, custom paint." He laughed awkwardly. "You know we're heading down range, right? This isn't some recruiting poster, it's real combat." Riannan stopped, turned, and faced him for the first time. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. "I'm aware of the assignment, Lance Corporal. That's why I requested the transfer." And with that she kept walking. The laughter behind her didn't sting anymore. Not really. It was too predictable. Each new posting began the same way, the jokes, the stares, the quiet disbelief that someone like her could possibly belong in their world. Inside the administrative building, the air was cooler, filled with the sterile hum of paperwork and authority. Behind the desk sat Staff Sergeant Helena Cortez, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Corporal Vex," Cortez said, glancing at her roster. "3rd Platoon, Bravo Company, Scout Sniper Attachment." Riannan set her rifle case gently on the floor. "Reporting as ordered, Staff Sergeant." Cortez studied her a long moment before speaking again. "You should know 3rd Platoon isn't easy. They've been together for 2 years, 3 deployments. They don't exactly welcome outsiders, especially not female attachments to combat units." "I understand, Staff Sergeant." "Do you?" Cortez leaned back, voice firm but not cruel. "Because what you just faced outside, that's every day, until you prove yourself or wash out. And proving yourself here means outperforming every man in that unit. Fair or not, that's reality." Riannan met her eyes without hesitation. "I've operated under those conditions before, ma'am. I'm prepared." The staff sergeant nodded slowly. "I hope you are." Outside, the sunlight felt harsher. More eyes turned her way now. Word spread fast on a base. And as she crossed the yard, Sergeant Dunham was waiting again, this time blocking her path, 2 other Marines flanking him like shadows. "We're running the range tomorrow," he said flatly. "I want to see what you can actually do with that art project. If you can't group under 6 inches at 300 meters, I'll personally recommend they reassign you to logistics, where you belong." "I'll be there," she replied calmly. "What time?" 500, and Corporal, leave the flowers at home. Bring a real rifle." "This is a real rifle, Sergeant," she said quietly. "You'll see that tomorrow." The barracks were long and gray, echoing with the restless noise of Marines winding down from drills. Her bunk was at the far end, isolated, of course. Always the far end. She unpacked in silence, her movements precise. Every piece of gear had its place, every fold exact. By midnight, the noise outside had turned from laughter to deliberate taunting. Boots clattering too close. Conversations suddenly louder when passing her bunk. And then the small gift. a bouquet of plastic flowers placed neatly on her footlocker, bright, cheap, and mocking. She stared at it for a long moment, then quietly set it aside. Sleep didn't come easy that night. It never did before a proving ground. At 4:30, she was already walking toward the rifle range. The world was dark and still, the air cold enough to bite. Her boots crunched over the gravel path as floodlights glared against the fog of early dawn. They were waiting for her, a dozen Marines and Sergeant Dunham standing at the center lane like a judge before sentencing. "Right on time," Dunham said, smirking. "I almost thought you'd reconsidered." "No, Sergeant." He gestured to the firing line. "Let's see if you can keep that pretty paint intact." She laid the rifle case on the bench and opened it slowly. The pink roses glowed faintly under the harsh lights, delicate brushstrokes over lethal steel. She painted them herself, one petal for every night she'd survived her first deployment, for every friend who didn't. The roses weren't decoration, they were memory. Behind her, Corporal Hayes muttered to someone, "My daughter's toy rifle looks more tactical than that." She ignored him, checked her bolt, her scope, her barrel. Every movement was ritual, not for show but for rhythm, for calm, for control. 20 rounds, Dunham said. 300 meters, standard qualification. Fail and you're done here. She nodded once, understood, Sergeant. And then silence. The kind of silence that stretches before something real begins. Her breathing slowed. The world shrank to the crosshair. One heartbeat, two. The first shot broke clean. Crack. The range officer's voice echoed through the still morning air. Center mass. A ripple of surprise moved through the group. She cycled the bolt, second shot, third, fourth. Each one struck home, tight and perfect. Her rhythm was steady, breath, trigger, follow-through. By the 10th shot, the jokes had stopped. No one spoke now. Even the sergeant's smirk had faded into something unreadable. The rifle sang in her hands. She spent a lifetime learning its song, the language of breath and pressure, wind and distance. When the final round broke, the range officer hesitated before speaking. 20 for 20, all in the 9 and 10 ring. That's a perfect score, Sergeant. The air was still again, heavy, uncertain. Dunham stepped up to the spotting scope, looked for himself, then looked at her. His jaw worked, but no words came. The cluster on the target was the size of a silver dollar. It wasn't supposed to be possible, not from someone like her, not from the woman they'd mocked an hour ago. She cleared her weapon, reassembled it, and locked the case shut with careful hands. No pride, no smirk, just quiet certainty. Lance Corporal Mathers approached first. "Where'd you train?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice now. "That's some of the tightest grouping I've ever seen." "Quantico initially," she said, "then advanced training." He nodded slowly, respect replacing doubt. Even Dunham had to concede something. "You can shoot," he said, reluctant but honest. "But the range is easy. Real combat's different. We'll see how you handle that." She met his gaze. "I look forward to it, Sergeant." As she turned to leave, she could feel the shift, small but real. The silence wasn't mockery anymore. It was recognition, and maybe the beginning of something harder to earn than fear or fame. Respect. Later that day, Lieutenant Colonel Archer summoned her. His office was lined with commendations and black and white photos of men who'd served before either of them were born. He read her file carefully, eyes flicking over the pages. "Top of your class," he said at last. "Expert marksman, multiple commendations under fire, but 4 transfers in 3 years, all citing unit cohesion issues." "Yes, sir. The reports say you're an exceptional shooter. They also say your presence creates tension." "That's accurate, sir. The tension doesn't come from my performance." Archer leaned back, watching her. "I know. I've read the unedited reports. Some of your commanding officers were less professional than others. I requested your transfer here because I need good shooters, not because of politics." He paused. "But you understand what that means, right? I'm not protecting you. You'll have to earn your place same as everyone else." "I wouldn't want it any other way, sir." He nodded slowly. "Good, because we deploy to Syria in 6 weeks. You'll be attached to Dunham's sniper team. Prove yourself in the field and the rest will follow." She rose, saluted, and left the room with quiet resolve. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the sharp scent of sand and salt from the Pacific. She stood there for a long moment, her hand resting on the rifle case strapped to her shoulder. The roses caught the light pink against black steel. People had always laughed at them, but she never painted them for them. They were for the ones who never came home, for the beauty that war tried to bury, and the small part of her that refused to let it die. And tomorrow, she would prove that strength didn't have to roar. Sometimes it only needed to breathe. Why did he push her so hard, harder than anyone else on the team? The desert training ground stretched for miles, a maze of rocky hills and dry gullies that shimmered beneath a merciless California sun. It was mid-afternoon, and Sergeant Dunham had his team running tactical movement drills, full combat load, no breaks, no shortcuts. For most, it was routine punishment. For Corporal Riannan Vex, it was something else entirely. It was her second proving ground. "Pick it up, Vex," Dunham barked, his voice cracking through the heat. "You fall behind, the team dies. You want that on your conscience." She didn't answer, just adjusted her pack straps and pushed harder, boots grinding against loose rock. The heat clawed at her lungs, but she kept her breathing steady, her focus locked. Hayes, the stocky corporal who shadowed Dunham like a loyal hound, smirked as he passed. "You sure you're cut out for this, sweetheart? You look like you belong in an air-conditioned office, not here." She ignored him, always did. Hayes fed on reaction, she'd learned that much already. Dunham led the formation up another incline, pace brutal and unrelenting. She understood what he was doing. He wasn't testing her aim this time, he was testing her endurance, her mind. He wanted her to break. She wouldn't. By the time they reached the observation ridge, sweat had darkened every uniform. Dunham dropped his pack, scanning the mock enemy position below. "All right," he said, voice firm but less hostile now. "Let's see what you can do when it isn't paper targets." He turned toward her. "You're on the gun, 800 meters. Variable wind, southwest 15 knots with gusts. Identify and engage priority targets." Ryan's muscles still ached, but she moved like a machine. Dropped her pack, set her rifle down, began to build her nest, elbows dug in, bipod steady, the butt of her weapon nestled deep against her shoulder. Torres, quiet, competent, all sharp eyes and professionalism, knelt beside her with a spotting scope. He didn't look thrilled about the assignment. "Wind calls your responsibility," he said flatly. "I'll just confirm hits." She adjusted the scope, eyes calm. Understood. Through her lens, the desert turned into geometry and pattern. Targets, mannequins dressed in simulated enemy gear, were scattered across the terrain. One on a mounted gun, another behind a mock wall, several more staggered in defilade. "Primary target, mounted weapon system," she murmured. "Range confirmed 800, wind full value at 15. Torres watched her work, the precision of it, no wasted motion, no hesitation. The first shot cracked through the still air. The impact came a heartbeat later. "Hit," Torres said, sounding surprised despite himself. She cycled the bolt, shifted slightly. Second shot. "Hit." Third. "Hit." Every round fell exactly where she wanted it. Breath control, trigger press, follow through, a rhythm she'd lived and died by. By the time the last target fell, Torres had gone silent. His skepticism had melted into something else, admiration mixed with disbelief. "Where exactly did you deploy before this?" he asked quietly. "Because that's not standard sniper school performance." Various locations, she replied evenly, chambering her last round. Mostly classified. From behind them, Dunham approached, dust rising around his boots. Your fundamentals are solid, he said, but combat's different. Real targets shoot back. You freeze for half a second out there, you're dead. I understand, Sergeant. Good, he said, because in 5 weeks you'll be seeing exactly what that means. The training intensified as the days passed. Riannan adapted to the tempo, her body learning the desert's cruelty. The way it drained you slow, hid its lessons in silence. She learned to shoot in crosswinds, under fatigue, in simulated chaos. And still the barracks never changed. Hayes led the charge against her there. Not openly, not enough for formal reprimand, but always close. A word here, a sneer there, a joke loud enough to be heard. Most ignored it, a few joined in. A few stayed silent, the ones who weren't sure what to believe. One night, while she cleaned her rifle in the dim light at the end of the barracks, Hayes and 2 others approached. He stood over her, arms crossed, smirking. "We've been talking," he said, "and we think it's only fair to let you know when we deploy, nobody's watching your back. You want to play soldier with your toy rifle, fine, but don't expect us to risk our lives covering for you." Ryan's hand paused on the cleaning rod, then resumed. "I've never asked anyone to cover for me," she said calmly. "That's the thing," Hayes said, voice dripping disdain. "In a firefight, everyone covers everyone, and none of us trust you to hold your end." She met his gaze for a long second. "Then we'll find out when we deploy, won't we?" The barracks went quiet. Something about the way she said it, calm, measured, carried more weight than a raised voice ever could. Before Hayes could respond, a voice came from the far end of the room. "Hayes tours outside now." "Dunham." The 3 men exchanged looks, then walked out without another word. When they were gone, Riannan exhaled slowly. The sound of her breath seemed louder than it should have been. She finished cleaning the rifle, wiped the roses carefully with an oiled cloth, and set it beside her bunk. The pink petals caught the low light, soft, silent, defiant. The following week brought a full-scale mission rehearsal exercise, 72 hours of simulated deployment. No sleep, no breaks, no shortcuts. 3rd Platoon Scout Sniper Team was assigned overwatch for a convoy moving through a mock hostile zone. They reached their position 2 hours before dawn, a ridge overlooking the route, cold wind slicing through their gear. The desert looked lifeless, but beneath the stars, the terrain whispered shifting sand, the distant hum of engines. Tors set up the spotting scope beside her. Dunham coordinated over the radio. Mathers and Hayes established security, eyes scanning the valley below. "Convoy moving," Dunham said quietly into the radio, eyes open. At 600, simulated contact began. The enemy mannequins popped up along the route, heat signatures triggered by motion sensors. "Engaging," Ryan said softly. Each shot fell like punctuation in a carefully written sentence. Crack, pause, crack. Tors called each impact. Hit, hit, another hit. By the time the convoy reached the end of the route, 43 targets were down. 0 friendly casualties. The after-action briefing was held under a tent filled with dust and exhaustion. Major Reeves, the operations officer, stood before them with a tablet. "I want to highlight 3rd Platoon Sniper Team," he said. Corporal Vex achieved a 97% hit rate across 43 engagements, many of those at extended ranges. The tent went quiet. Marines who had dismissed her weeks ago now stared in silence. Even Hayes looked back from the front row, his face unreadable. Dunham stood. "Corporal Vex performed exceptionally," he said. "But it was a team effort, Tors spotting, coordination with the convoy, communication across the board." Ryan caught the subtle tone, respect without overstatement. For the first time, Dunham wasn't defending her presence. He was including her. When the briefing ended, Mathers approached. "Hey, about before," he said awkwardly. "You really know your stuff. You made us all look good out there." "Just doing my job," she replied with a faint smile. That night the barracks were quieter. Not friendly, not yet, but different, the kind of silence that comes before change. Still, not everyone was ready to accept it. As she walked back from the mess hall, she overheard Hayes talking to a few Marines from another platoon. His voice was low but deliberate, carrying just enough to reach her. "Sure, she can shoot mannequins, but when the bullets start flying, she'll freeze. I give her a week in Syria before they pull her out." Ryan kept walking, didn't turn, didn't react. But the words stayed with her, not as pain but as fuel. The deployment came faster than anyone expected. No ceremony, no speeches, just a midnight loading operation under floodlights and silence. The aircraft's engines thundered across the tarmac, the smell of jet fuel thick in the air. Inside the transport, Marines sat shoulder to shoulder, faces hard with quiet reflection. Ryan sat between equipment pallets, her rifle case secured beside her. The roses gleamed faintly in the dim light, soft, almost out of place among the matte olive drab. Mathers leaned across the aisle. "Hey," he said, "when we get there, watch your six, yeah." She nodded, "Always." He smiled faintly. "Just don't make the rest of us look too bad." The engines roared, drowning out the small talk. The floor trembled as the plane lifted into the dark sky. As the world below shrank into blackness, Riannan closed her eyes and rested her head against the metal wall. Her pulse was calm, her breath even. She wasn't afraid of combat. She was afraid of wasting it, of fighting without meaning. And yet deep inside, a quiet thought whispered through the hum of the engines. Maybe this time, she wouldn't be fighting for acceptance. Maybe this time, she'd be fighting for something far greater, something no one could laugh at again. Why did the desert always smell like dust and metal? When the aircraft door opened over northern Syria, the heat hit them like a physical force. The kind of heat that burned through the fabric of uniforms and settled deep into bone. Fine sand hung in the air like smoke. The light, too bright, too white, made the world look overexposed. Forward Operating Base Hadera was little more than a collection of concrete barriers, prefabricated structures, and the constant drone of generators. Marines moved like ghosts through the dust, their faces hidden behind goggles and cloth. For Corporal Riannan Vex it was familiar. The smell of jet fuel, the muted tension in every movement, the silence that always followed arrival in a combat zone, a silence that felt heavier than fear. 3rd Platoon was assigned to the Eastern Perimeter Compound, a walled section facing open desert. It was far enough from the main base to feel isolated. That isolation would define everything that came next. Sergeant Dunham gathered the team in the Tactical Operations Center, a narrow room humming with radios and maps pinned across the walls. "Our mission's reconnaissance and interdiction along Highway 7, he said, tracing a red line across the map. "Intel says enemy forces are using this route to move weapons and personnel between strongholds. We'll be providing overwatch and neutralizing confirmed high-value targets." He glanced at Ryan, not condescending, not friendly, just factual. "Your lead shooter, Tors, your spotting. Mathers and Hayes will rotate security. Rules of engagement are strict. Positive ID before any shot." Everyone nodded, no one spoke. 48 hours later, they were moving through darkness. The desert swallowed sound, their boots whispering against rock, breath measured, every step calculated. The armored vehicles had dropped them miles from the observation point. Now it was just them and the vast emptiness. They reached the ridge 3 hours before dawn. Ryan immediately began setting up. Her movements were mechanical but graceful, the kind of precision that comes from years of repetition. Tors positioned beside her with the spotting scope. Below them, Highway 7 cut through the valley like a scar, cracked asphalt and old tire tracks fading into the horizon. They waited. Hours stretched. The sun rose, burning away the cool air, turning their gear into ovens. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't move. Stillness was discipline. Stillness was survival. Movement, Tors whispered. 3 vehicles approaching from the north, range 2,000 meters. Ryan adjusted her scope. Through the heat shimmer, she saw them clearly, 2 technicals mounted with heavy guns and 1 transport truck. The convoy moved confidently, unaware. Dunham's voice came low over the radio. Stand by for ID. They waited, the kind of waiting that made seconds feel like hours. Then, the response came from Battalion. Confirmed weapons transport. You are cleared to engage priority targets. 2 shots, then relocate, Dunham said. Ryan settled in. The rifle was alive in her hands, every vibration, every shift of the wind translated through her bones. Wind 3 to 5, Tors murmured. You'll need to time between gusts. She exhaled slowly, eyes locked through the glass. The lead vehicle's gunner stood behind the mounted weapon, scanning the horizon. She fired during the lull. Crack! The bullet's flight was silent across distance. Then, a soft bloom of dust as the gunner collapsed backward. Target down, Tors confirmed. The second vehicle accelerated, weaving. She let it, adjusted her hold, and fired again. The impact came just as the vehicle cleared a bend. Second target down, Tors said, voice low with awe. Dunham didn't hesitate. Pack it up. Mortars will be on that ridge any second. They moved fast. Years of discipline compressed into seconds of efficiency. By the time the first mortar round struck, they were already half a kilometer away, the explosion chasing dust into the sky behind them. No one spoke until they reached the extraction zone. Tors finally broke the silence. That was 2,000 meters, he said quietly. In shifting wind, I've never seen anything like that. Ryan wiped sweat from her face. It's just numbers, she said, physics and patience. He smiled faintly. No, that's something else. Back at base, their after-action review was quick but significant. Drone footage confirmed both kills, each round hitting exactly where she'd aimed. Major Reeves looked over the report. Those were textbook precision engagements, he said. Excellent work. Dunham didn't comment, but when they left the debrief, he walked beside her in silence for a few steps before finally speaking. Those shots were impressive, Corporal. Thank you, Sergeant. He nodded once, that was all, but from Dunham it was enough. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just professional acknowledgement, respect. But it came with something else too, scrutiny. Word of her shots spread fast through the battalion. Marines who hadn't spoken to her now found excuses to linger nearby, asking casual questions about wind drift, about optics, about how the hell she saw that far. Some asked with admiration, others like Hayes with resentment. He cornered her near the mess tent a few days later. I heard the brass talking about those hits, he said. Said they were exceptional. She didn't respond. He took a step closer. You know what I think? I think luck can look a lot like skill when nobody's close enough to verify the shots. Her tone didn't change. Then maybe you should come verify next time. His smirk faltered, just slightly. Their next missions came faster. Each one pushed them deeper into the rhythm of combat, reconnaissance, overwatch, precision engagement, extraction. Ryan became the silent constant, the one who didn't talk much but whose rifle spoke for her. Each time she fired, the others believed a little more. But Hayes never stopped talking. He couldn't question her shooting anymore, so he attacked her judgment instead. She's too eager to engage, he'd say during downtime. Doesn't think about consequences. It was subtle, just enough to sow doubt, not enough to draw reprimand. And yet the cracks were forming. One evening, while they ate in the dim glow of the mess tent, Hayes started again. I heard half our targets weren't even confirmed HVTs. Command just wanted someone eager enough to pull the trigger. Ryan kept eating, ignored him. Tors, sitting across from her, set down his fork. His voice came out calm but edged. That's a lie, Hayes. Every engagement's verified. You've seen the data. Hayes smiled without humor. Oh, so now you're her defense attorney. People can change their minds when they're proven wrong, Tors said. You should try it. The tent went still. Then Dunham's voice cut through the tension from the entrance. Hayes, guard duty, North Tower, 1800 to midnight. Tors, you relieve him at 0. No argument, no hesitation. That was the thing about Dunham, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The next mission would be different. High stakes, high risk. Intelligence confirmed that a senior enemy commander, codenamed Falcon, would be traveling through the sector within 24 hours. The convoy route was narrow, hemmed by cliffs on one side and open sand on the other. Their job was to stop it. Briefing was tense. Dunham pointed to the map, his finger tracing the target area. Estimated range to engagement point, 2,800 meters. Conditions will be tough, elevation difference, variable wind, possible heat distortion. We'll have one window, one shot. 2,800. Even for a trained sniper, that was pushing the edge of the possible. They moved before dawn, the moon slicing across the valley in cold silver. The climb to the ridge took hours. The rocks tore at their gloves, their knees. Every movement felt like preparation for something irreversible. By sunrise, they were in position. Convoy approaching, Tors whispered through the mic. 4 vehicles, matches intel profile. Through her scope, Ryan saw the glint of metal. The heat shimmer made the image dance, but she could see the second vehicle slowing, the rear door opening. A figure emerged, confident, surrounded by guards. That's our target, Dunham said. You're cleared to engage. The wind was erratic, shifting. She waited, reading the mirage, then a moment of stillness. Wind's dropping, Tors whispered. You've got 10 seconds. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil rolled through her shoulder. Time stretched. 2.5 seconds later, impact. The target folded instantly. Guards scattered. Direct hit, Tors confirmed. His voice was low, reverent. Target down. They broke position immediately. Their exfiltration clean, silent, perfect. Back at base, the operation was declared a complete success. The target had been on coalition lists for months. His removal disrupted command networks across the region. Dunham said nothing during the debrief, but when they left, he placed a hand on her shoulder. Just one word. Well done. She nodded. No pride, no arrogance, just quiet purpose. Because the truth was, she didn't shoot for recognition. She shot for precision, for order, for the one perfect second when chaos bowed to her will. That night, while cleaning her rifle under the stars, Tors approached, helmet tucked under his arm. You ever miss? He asked softly. Ryan looked up. Yes. He waited for her to elaborate. Not the shot, she said after a pause. Just what comes after. Tors frowned slightly. What comes after? She ran a cloth over the painted roses, their color muted by sand and time. The silence, she whispered. Why did they start whispering her name like it was a rumor? At first, it was just quiet talk, background noise in the barracks and briefing tents. Marines from other units asking questions, trading stories that grew taller with every retelling. You hear about the woman sniper with the flowers on her rifle. They say she hit a convoy commander at almost 3 clicks. Now that's BS, no one can make that shot. Then explain the video feed. HQ confirmed it. And just like that, Corporal Riannan Vex became something the Marine Corps wasn't sure how to define, a contradiction in fatigues. Too quiet to be boastful, too precise to ignore, too mysterious to understand. Even Dunham started to notice the shift. In the chow hall, in the training yard, even walking between tents, people would look. Not mockery now, not disbelief, but curiosity tinged with something else. Respect. It wasn't the kind of respect that was given freely. It had been earned in dust, sweat, and recoil. But respect is never without a cost. 2 weeks after the Falcon mission, the unit was granted a short reprieve from active ops. Just enough time to breathe, though nobody really could. The desert air didn't allow it. Ryan sat outside the makeshift barracks, the night wind cooling her face. Her rifle rested across her lap, disassembled, cleaned for the third time that day. Old habit, ritual really. She wasn't thinking about the mission's success, or the whispered praise. She was thinking about the silence that came after pulling the trigger, that small hollow space inside her chest that never seemed to fill, no matter how many lives she saved or ended. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was Tors. He sat down beside her, holding 2 paper cups of bitter instant coffee. "You look like you're trying to scrub the soul out of that rifle." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I am." He handed her a cup. "You ever stop? Stop cleaning or stop thinking?" "Either." She considered. "No." The night was quiet for a long moment. Then Tors spoke again, softer now. "Can I ask something about before?" She didn't look up. "Before what?" "Before you joined the Corps." She took a slow sip of the coffee, eyes distant. "That's a long story." "I'm not going anywhere." Her lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then maybe one day." Tors didn't push. He'd learned that much about her. She revealed things only in pieces, like a sniper scanning terrain through shifting mirage, one patch of clarity at a time. But the truth was, she wasn't avoiding the question. She was protecting something. Something she hadn't told anyone. The next morning brought tension like static before a storm. Hayes was at the range early, running drills. Ryan joined soon after, setting up 300 meters down. He didn't speak at first, just fired, reloaded, fired again. Then, after a long pause, he said without turning, "Guess you're famous now." "Not really." "That shot with the Falcon convoy, everyone saying it's a record." She didn't reply. He set his rifle down, finally looking her way. "You know, some of us actually worked for years to get respect around here. You just had to paint your gun and pull one lucky trigger." She met his gaze evenly. "Respect isn't a competition." He laughed once, dry and sharp. "You think anyone would remember your name if you hadn't painted that rifle? You made yourself a spectacle. You wanted attention." The accusation stung, not because it was true, but because it was so far from it. She placed the bolt assembly carefully on the mat. "You don't know me, Corporal." "I know enough," Hayes snapped. "You like the glory, the mystery, the way people talk about you now. But out here, that kind of spotlight gets people killed." Before she could respond, Dunham's voice cut across the range. "Both of you, enough." He strode over, face tight with controlled anger. "You want to fight, do it after deployment. Out here, you're a team." Hayes muttered something under his breath but turned away. Dunham looked at her for a long moment. "Don't let him get in your head." She nodded once. "He's not in my head, Sergeant." But later that night, alone in her bunk, his words echoed anyway. "You wanted attention." She looked at the rifle case beside her, the painted roses catching faint light. The irony hurt. Those roses weren't meant for attention. They were memorials, for the ones who died beside her in a war most people had already forgotten. For every name that never made it to a plaque. But Hayes wouldn't understand that. Maybe no one would. 3 nights later, the base was hit. It started with a sound distant, almost too faint to notice. Then came the whistle, the one you only hear for half a second before the world erupts. Boom! The impact shook the ground, scattering sand and light. Alarms screamed through the compound. Indirect fire, take cover. Ryan hit the ground, rolling behind a concrete barrier. Dust filled the air, mixing with smoke and adrenaline. Dunham's voice came over the radio. All units report. 3rd platoon, check your sectors. Torres was already moving toward the North Tower. Hayes followed reluctantly. Ryan grabbed her rifle, scanning the horizon through the chaos. Another shell landed closer this time, debris slicing through the air like shrapnel from hell. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like forever. When it finally stopped, the silence afterward was worse than the noise. One Marine was wounded, minor injuries, the base itself shaken but intact. Later, after the medics cleared the scene, Dunham walked through the wreckage with grim focus. He stopped when he saw her. "You all right, Corporal?" "Yes, Sergeant." He nodded. "We got lucky tonight, but luck doesn't last. They'll try again." He glanced toward the tower where Hayes stood, smoking despite orders against it. "You ever wonder why people like him make it this far?" She followed his gaze. "Because they never had to earn it." Dunham almost smiled. "Maybe." Then he added, quieter, "Or maybe the Corps needs both kinds, the fighters and the believers." He started walking away, then stopped. "You're the latter, Vex, don't forget that." But something changed after the attack. Command wanted retaliation, fast and visible. Intelligence pointed to an enemy mortar team operating from a canyon 30 kilometers east. 3rd platoon got the mission. "Observation and confirmation," Dunham said in the briefing. "We find them, we fix them. Air support finishes the job. No engagements unless fired upon." The terrain was brutal, jagged rock, shifting wind, narrow paths carved by centuries of erosion. The kind of place that felt ancient, untouched, almost sacred in its silence. By dusk, they reached the overwatch position. Torres set up the scope, scanning the canyon floor. "Movement, 2 technicals, tripod-mounted tubes, looks like our guys." Dunham nodded. "Mark their coordinates. No engagement until air confirms." They waited. Minutes stretched. The sun bled across the horizon in shades of red and gold. Then distant gunfire, not theirs, not random, directed. "Contact, they've spotted another patrol," Dunham shouted. Through her scope, Ryan saw the mortar team shifting fire. A group of friendly Marines caught in the open, pinned between rock and smoke. "Command not answering," Torres said, voice tight. Dunham cursed. "We're supposed to wait for air." But the patrol wouldn't survive waiting. Ryan's jaw tightened. "I have a shot." "Negative," Dunham said immediately. "Those are orders." She didn't move her eye from the scope. "They won't last another 30 seconds. "Vex." She fired. The first shot hit the spotter. The second destroyed the mortar tube. The canyon lit up with confusion, the enemy scattering. Torres called it out, stunned. "Targets down, all clear." Dunham's glare was cold. "You just violated command orders." "I saved 6 Marines," she said quietly. He didn't answer, not then. Back at base, the fallout was immediate. Command called it an unauthorized engagement. She called it common sense. Dunham stood beside her during the inquiry. His tone was even, but his presence said everything. Corporal Vex acted based on imminent threat assessment. Her decision directly prevented further casualties. After a tense pause, the major nodded. "Record stands, no disciplinary action." When they walked out, Dunham finally spoke. "You ever disobey me again, I'll pull your rifle myself." "Yes, Sergeant." He paused. "But for what it's worth, you did the right thing." She looked at him then, the desert wind whipping between them. "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't the same as following orders." Dunham nodded slowly. "And sometimes it's harder." That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. She sat outside again, rifle across her knees, eyes fixed on the stars. The roses on her weapon looked darker now, stained by dust, by time, maybe by guilt. Tors joined her, quiet as ever. "You saved them," he said softly. She didn't look up. "I broke protocol." "Protocol doesn't bleed." She exhaled, her voice low, distant. "The ones I couldn't save still follow me." He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, saw the weight behind her eyes. The kind that doesn't come from training or missions, but from loss too personal to name. There was something in her silence, something he hadn't asked yet but soon would. Because there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Why did she paint roses on a weapon meant for killing? No one had ever asked her, not really. They just assumed it was vanity, or rebellion, or some strange quirk to make herself memorable. But that night, sitting under a fractured moon in the Syrian desert, Corporal Riannan Vex finally told someone the truth. Tors sat across from her, elbows on his knees, the faint orange glow of a cigarette cutting through the dark. They hadn't spoken for a while, not since the unauthorized engagement. The air between them was heavy with things unsaid. He broke the silence first. "You ever going to tell me what the roses mean?" She ran a cloth slowly over the rifle's barrel. Her voice came out low, almost a whisper. "They're not for me." "Then who?" She hesitated, the kind of hesitation that comes from reopening an old wound. "For them," she said finally, "the ones we left behind." Tors frowned. "You mean your old unit?" Her eyes were distant, lost somewhere beyond the horizon. "Operation Viper's Gate. Classified. I was attached to a reconnaissance detachment, 9 of us. We went in undercover to map insurgent routes, call for air support if needed. Only 2 of us came back." He sat quietly, not daring to interrupt. "It was supposed to be routine," she continued softly. "But nothing in war ever is. We were compromised on day 4, ambushed in an abandoned compound outside Al-Qaria. They hit us at dawn, mortars, small arms, everything. We held out for hours, waiting for extraction that never came." Her hand stilled on the rifle. "One by one they fell. I remember each of them. Harper, who joked too much. Singh, who prayed before every mission. Jackson, who sang even when we told him to shut up. They didn't die quietly. No one does." Tors swallowed hard. "And the roses?" "I painted one for each of them," she said. "A rose for every friend I buried in the sand." The wind moved through the camp, a sound like breathing. Tors finally understood. The rifle wasn't a statement, it was a grave marker. The following days blurred into long hours of patrols, overwatch missions, and tense waiting. Yet something had shifted between them. Tors no longer looked at her as an enigma, but as someone who carried ghosts she refused to put down. But while one bond deepened, another began to crack. Hayes had grown colder since the disciplinary review. He followed orders, spoke when spoken to, but the contempt in his eyes burned hotter with every passing day. During one patrol briefing, Dunham announced, "We'll be conducting joint recon with Echo Company near the ridgeline. Intelligence indicates insurgent regrouping after the mortar strike. Minimal contact expected." Minimal, it was the word that always cursed a mission. They left before dawn. The terrain was harsh, steep ridges, loose rock, the kind that punished every step. The wind cut through their gear, carrying fine dust that stung the skin. Ryan walked point, scanning ahead through her scope. Tors followed, radio static whispering in her ear. Dunham and Hayes brought up the rear. By midday, they reached the ridge overlooking a dry wadi, empty, silent. Too silent. "Movement," Tors whispered. 3 heat signatures, maybe 4. She adjusted the scope. The figures moved in the shadows of crumbled stone. Not civilians, armed. "Ambush position?" Dunham asked. "Possible, no clear line of sight yet." Hayes moved forward slightly, impatient. "They could just be scavengers." "No," Ryan said firmly. "Patterns coordinated, they're waiting." But before Dunham could order a retreat, the world exploded. The first RPG struck the ridge below them, sending dirt and fire into the air. Shrapnel hissed past like angry insects. "Contact East Ridge," Dunham shouted, diving for cover. Tors pulled Ryan down just as another blast tore through the rock behind them. Bullets shredded the ground where they'd been standing seconds ago. Ryan rolled to position, scope up. Targets appeared through the haze, silhouettes darting between stone. "Two on the flank," Tors called. She fired. Crack, one dropped. Cracked another. But there were more, dozens. "Fall back," Dunham yelled. "We're outnumbered." They moved downhill under fire, bullets snapping against rock. And then Hayes froze. He was exposed, standing in open terrain, firing wildly into smoke. Ryan shouted, "Move, damn it." But he didn't. His face was pale, eyes wide, the look of someone realizing death was real. A flash of light, another RPG. Ryan sprinted without thinking, tackling him behind a boulder as the explosion ripped the ground apart where he'd stood. "Get up," she shouted, dragging him by the strap of his vest. Hayes's breathing was ragged. I can't." "You can," she said sharply. "Move." He stumbled to his feet, following her through the dust. By the time they reached the extraction point, their uniforms were torn, their bodies bruised, and the radio filled with static and chaos. A squad from Echo Company finally arrived, laying suppressive fire as they pulled them out. When the firing stopped, the silence returned, heavier this time. They survived, but barely. Back at base, the tension was immediate. Dunham was livid. "You froze," he said to Hayes in the debrief. "You compromised the team. Vex had to pull you out under fire." Hayes's jaw clenched. "We were ambushed. Nobody could have." "You froze," Dunham repeated, voice hard as stone. "Own it." Hayes looked at Ryan, his eyes burning. "She's lying. She panicked and made a bad call." Dunham's voice rose. "Enough." But Ryan just stared at Hayes, not with anger but with something colder. Pity. "I don't need to lie," she said quietly. "You and I both know what happened." For a moment he said nothing. Then he looked away. "You think saving me makes you a hero. You're just trying to prove something." "No," she said. "I'm trying to forget something." He didn't understand. Maybe he never would. That night word spread again, this time twisted. By morning, whispers floated across the compound. That she'd broken formation, that she'd dragged Hayes off mission to grandstand, that she'd nearly cost them all their lives. Tors confronted her at breakfast. "You know who started it, right?" She didn't need to ask. Hayes sat across the mess tent, laughing too loudly at something that wasn't funny. "Let him talk," she said. Tors frowned. "That's not you talking." "It's survival," she said quietly. "The Corps doesn't care about truth. It cares about results, and when the truth doesn't fit, it gets buried." She stood taking her tray. "But results, they can't be buried." 2 weeks later, the mission came that would change everything. Intel reported a convoy of high-ranking insurgents traveling through the Al Raqqa Plateau, mountainous terrain, extreme range. The kind of engagement no one wanted. "Estimated distance, 5,000 meters, Dunham briefed. "That's insane," Tors muttered. Dunham nodded. "That's why Vex is taking the shot." Silence fell. Even Hayes didn't speak. The plan was simple in theory, impossible in execution. Infiltrate the ridge under cover of darkness, confirm visual, eliminate the target before exfiltration. They moved out under a moonless sky. The air was thin and cold. Ryan's heart pounded steady, not from fear but from purpose. Every step felt like the edge of something irreversible. By dawn, they reached the position. The valley below stretched endlessly, the convoy just visible through heat distortion. Tors scanned the rangefinder. 5,800 meters, Jesus. She adjusted her scope, checked wind flags. It's possible, she murmured. Hayes laughed quietly. Possible? You're talking about over 3.5 miles. Then maybe you should stand closer, she said without looking at him. Dunham crouched beside her. You sure you can do this? She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes locked on the moving vehicles far below, the slow rhythm of engines echoing across distance. I've done harder, she said. The world went still. She exhaled. The crosshair drifted, settled. Crack. No one breathed. 3 seconds later, the lead vehicle erupted. Direct hit. Even the wind seemed to pause. Tor's voice came out a whisper, 6,000 meters. Hayes stared at her like he was seeing something not entirely human. Dunham looked through the scope himself, then back at her. That wasn't supposed to be possible. Ryan locked the bolt back, setting her rifle down gently. Neither were the roses. When they returned to base, there was no laughter anymore, no doubt. The whispers changed once again, this time into something different. Respect, fear, wonder. And yet she didn't feel pride, just a quiet ache. Because with every impossible shot, she drifted further from who she once was. That night she sat alone again, watching the desert stars through the thin veil of sand. Tors joined her quietly. 6,000 meters, he said. You realize you just made history. She shook her head. History forgets fast. He studied her face. Then why do you keep doing it? She looked down at the rifle. The roses faded now, the paint worn by war and time. Because somewhere out there, she said softly, someone's still waiting for a bullet that should have been mine. Why did silence always follow her victories? When the shot report reached command, it didn't stay quiet for long. Numbers that high never did. 6,000 meters, confirmed kill, 0 adjustment. At first it was disbelief, then verification, then the inevitable flood of noise, articles, interviews, even foreign press catching wind of it. A single sniper shot nearly 4 miles under combat conditions. Impossible, they said, but it had happened. And it wasn't just any sniper, it was her. The Pink Crow's rifle. The woman the Marines once mocked in whispers now carried a myth behind her name. At the base, things changed overnight. The way people looked at her. The way they paused when she walked by, some out of awe, some out of resentment, some because they didn't know what to make of her anymore. Ryan hated it. Every story twisted something. They called her the Rose Shooter, the Angel of Hadara, Lady Death with a rifle. She never said a word in any interview. Command refused all media access, but the legend kept growing. And legends, she knew, had a way of turning real people into ghosts. Dunham called her into his office 2 days later. The desert sun poured through the slats, dust motes glowing in the light. He looked up from a stack of reports, expression unreadable. You realize this is going to follow you forever. She stood at ease. It was just another mission, Sergeant. He raised an eyebrow. Just another mission. You broke a record nobody thought could be broken. I didn't do it for a record. I know that, he said, but the rest of the world doesn't. Command wants to declassify parts of the operation for morale purposes, recruitment propaganda. Her jaw tightened, so they can make it a story. That's what they do, he said quietly. That's what they've always done. She stared past him, out the small window. The wind was kicking up dust devils over the flat sand beyond the wire. The ones I painted these roses for, they wouldn't want to be part of a poster. He sighed. You don't get to choose that, Corporal, not anymore. By evening, her face had already been passed through unofficial channels. Someone had leaked the shot footage, grainy drone visuals showing a lone figure prone on a ridge, a pink-marked rifle gleaming under desert light. It went viral faster than any report could contain. When she walked through camp that night, she could feel it, the eyes that lingered too long, the conversations that stopped mid-sentence when she passed. Even Tors looked uneasy. It's out there, he said quietly. Everywhere, they're calling you the Ghost Rose. She gave a small, tired smile. That sounds like something a screenwriter came up with. It's not right, Tors muttered. They don't even know you. That's fine, she said. I don't want them to. But Hayes did. He watched her from across the yard that night, cigarette glowing between his fingers. His face was shadowed, expression unreadable. When she passed, he muttered just loud enough for her to hear. Must be nice, huh? Everyone finally seeing what you wanted them to see. She stopped. You think I wanted this? I think you've been chasing attention since the day you showed up with that painted gun, he snapped. And now you've got it. Congratulations, hero. Her eyes were steady, voice low. You were there when I pulled you out of the blast zone. Tell me, did that look like someone chasing attention? Hayes's expression faltered, but only for a moment. You think saving one man cancels everything else? No, she said. I think you've forgotten what matters. She walked away. But that was the last calm moment they'd have for weeks. The attacks began again, small, surgical strikes by enemy cells retaliating for the convoy kill. Command believed it was personal. Ryan's shot hadn't just killed a target. It had insulted their leadership. Now they wanted to make her pay. 3rd Platoon rotated to night overwatch shifts, a constant movement, endless tension. Every shadow looked alive. Every flicker on infrared felt like a ghost waiting to bite. Sleep became a luxury. One night during a perimeter rotation, Tors found her sitting alone on the tower steps, rifle across her knees, staring into the darkness. You don't sleep anymore, he said quietly. I dream too loud, she replied. He sat beside her. The night wind carried the sound of distant gunfire, faint but real. You ever think about what you'll do after this? He asked. She laughed once softly. After. Yeah, when the war ends. She looked out toward the horizon. Wars don't end, they just move to new people. He studied her in the dim light. You don't have to carry it forever, you know, the guilt, the ghosts. Her hands tightened around the rifle. If I stop carrying them, who will? Tors opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, a sharp crack split the night. Incoming. The first explosion hit near the eastern wall. Sirens blared. Marines scattered for cover. The air filled with dust and chaos. Contact North Sector, Dunham's voice roared over the comms. Everyone up. Ryan and Tors moved instinctively, sprinting to their assigned post. Tracers carved the night. Return fire flashed from the towers. Through her scope, she caught the muzzle flashes, enemy fighters positioned on a ridge just outside the wire, using suppressed weapons. She exhaled, focused. Crack. One down. Crack. Another. Push east flank, Dunham ordered. Hayes's voice crackled through the radio. Copy, moving. But something was off. Ryan scanned the thermal feed, the heat signatures shifting, separating. Then she saw it. A single figure moving along their flank, closer than any of the others. Hayes, fall back, she yelled into the radio. They're flanking you. Static, then his voice breathless. I don't see anything. The explosion cut him off. The shockwave slammed into the compound, throwing her backward. Her ears rang, everything blurred. Hayes is hit, Tors shouted. He's outside the wire. Ryan's body moved before her mind could catch up. She vaulted the barrier, ignoring Dunham's shout behind her. The night roared with gunfire and dust. She found him 10 meters from the breach, half buried in rubble, one leg mangled, blood soaking through his uniform. Stay with me, she said, kneeling beside him. His eyes darted, unfocused. Why'd you come out here? Because I don't leave people behind. He gave a weak, bitter laugh. Even people who don't deserve it. She tightened the tourniquet, her hands slick with blood, especially those. More rounds hit nearby. Tors and 2 others covered them from the wall. We've got 30 seconds, he shouted. Ryan heaved haze over her shoulder. Pain shot through her ribs, but she didn't stop. By the time they crossed back inside, her body was shaking with exhaustion. Medics rushed forward. Dunham grabbed her arm, shouting over the noise. "You could have been killed." "I couldn't let him die," she said simply. He stared at her, then nodded once. "All right." Hours later, she sat outside the medical tent, uniform streaked with blood and dust. Tors brought her a canteen. "He'll live," he said softly. "You saved him again." She nodded, silent. "He asked for you," Tors added. Ryan hesitated, then entered the tent. The lights were dim. Hayes lay on a cot, bandaged, pale but conscious. He looked at her, no smirk this time, no anger, just exhaustion and disbelief. "You should have left me," he said weakly. She shook her head. "That's not what Marines do." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong about you." She didn't reply, just adjusted his IV line, making sure it was steady. "Why?" he asked. "After everything I said, why still save me?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "Because if I start deciding who deserves saving, I'm no better than the ones we fight." He blinked, tears mixing with dust. "I'm sorry." She nodded once. "Rest, that's all that matters now." When she stepped outside again, the first light of dawn was breaking over the desert. The world looked softer, almost peaceful. Tors leaned against a wall, arms crossed. "You're insane, you know that." "Maybe," she said. He smiled faintly. "But you're the kind of insane that keeps people alive." She looked out toward the horizon, the same endless desert that had buried too many names. "No," she murmured, "just the kind that remembers them." The wind carried her words away, scattering them into the gold of morning. And somewhere behind that rising sun, another mission was already waiting, because war never pauses long enough for heroes. But for now, for this single breath, the laughter was gone. No one mocked the rifle with roses anymore. No one doubted the woman who carried it. They just watched her in silence, the way you watch a force you can't quite explain, and somehow don't ever want to face. Why did home feel more like exile? When the orders came, they were sealed in an envelope with the thin, precise handwriting of someone who didn't know her. Temporary reassignment, Quantico. Purpose, public relations and medal review. The convoy that took her to the airfield was quiet. No music, no chatter, just the dull hum of tires over sand. She didn't speak and no one asked her to. As the helicopter lifted off, the desert shrank beneath her, a vast expanse of gold and gray. She watched until the base became a dot, until the horizon swallowed the last trace of everything she'd survived. Back home, the air was thick with noise, reporters, cameras, invitations. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who made the impossible shot. They called her a hero. She hated the word. The first interview happened before she even unpacked. A bright studio, polished microphones, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Corporal Vex, 6,000 meters, the farthest confirmed sniper kill in U.S. military history. How does it feel to make history? She looked at the interviewer. Blonde hair, crisp suit, too clean to understand. "It doesn't feel like anything," she said quietly. The interviewer blinked. "Nothing, you don't feel pride." "I feel tired." A nervous laugh. "Well, I'm sure it was worth it, right? The lives you saved, the recognition." She cut him off. "You're mistaking recognition for understanding. They're not the same." The room went quiet. Cameras rolled. Producers shifted uncomfortably. She didn't care. The next week blurred, ceremonies, debriefs, endless questions that all sounded the same. Every room she entered had too much light, too much noise, too many people trying to turn her into something she was. At the medal presentation, she stood in dress blues that didn't feel like hers. The general spoke about precision, courage, sacrifice. Her name echoed through the hall, followed by applause that sounded hollow. When they pinned the metal to her chest, she barely felt its weight. All she could think about was the faces of the ones who never got medals. Harper Singh Jackson. The ghosts behind the roses. Later that night in her temporary quarters, she stared at her reflection. The metal gleamed under the fluorescent light, too bright, too clean. She took it off and set it beside the rifle case. The roses looked faded now, worn down by wind, sand, and memory. Her phone buzzed, a message from Tours. "Still out here. Base is quiet without you. Hayes walking again, says you saved his soul." She smiled faintly, then another message came. "They're saying you're not coming back. Is that true?" Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't answer. The following day, she was summoned to a classified debriefing. The room was cold and sterile, filled with men in uniforms too new to have ever been dirty. A colonel spoke without looking at her. "Corporal Vex, regarding the Al Raqqa operation, the footage has been reviewed. While your performance was exemplary, your method of engagement raises procedural concerns." She frowned. "Procedural concerns?" He nodded. "There's an internal inquiry into the circumstances surrounding the shot. Questions about authorization, communication delays, and adherence to chain of command." "Are you saying it was unauthorized?" "We're saying we need to ensure compliance. A single shot that changes global narratives needs clarity." She stared at him. Clarity. The colonel folded his hands. "The world wants heroes, Corporal, but the department wants control." There it was, the truth buried beneath polished words. They didn't want a sniper. They wanted a symbol, one they could edit, repackage, and claim ownership over. That night she walked the halls of Quantico alone. The hum of air vents replaced the wind she'd grown used to. Everything smelled of disinfectant instead of dust. In the dim light of the armory, she found her rifle locked behind glass, labeled, catalogued, stripped of purpose. There was a plaque beneath it. "Weapon used in the record-setting engagement at Al Raqqa." They had already turned it into an artifact. She stared at the roses through the glass. They looked smaller somehow, trapped, lifeless. When she turned, a familiar voice stopped her. "Dunham." He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "They flew me in for debrief. Figured I'd find you here." She didn't move. "It doesn't belong here." He stepped closer. "Neither do you." She looked at him, eyes hollow. "Then why am I here, Sergeant?" "Because you became the story," he said quietly, "and stories don't get to retire." She laughed once, the kind that sounds more like pain than humor. "They can have their story, just not me." Dunham studied her for a long moment. "You know what they're saying, right? That they're thinking of promoting you, maybe commissioning, making you the face of the new precision campaign." Her expression didn't change. "The face of something that doesn't exist." He exhaled slowly. "I can pull some strings, get you transferred back to Hadara. It won't be easy, but I'm not going back." He blinked. "Then where?" She looked back at the rifle. "Anywhere they can't find me." 2 days later, she disappeared. No formal resignation, no AWOL report, just gone. The Marines searched quietly, carefully. Officially, she was on extended psychological leave. Unofficially, they had no idea where she went. Tours sent message after message. None answered. Dunham filed a report under unconfirmed civilian relocation. But she was gone. Months passed. The war went on without her. New names, new missions, new headlines. Until one day, a journalist embedded with an aid convoy in northern Iraq sent back a story. A small one, buried between larger articles. Unidentified sniper neutralizes insurgent assault near refugee camp. Unknown individual matching, no current military roster. They didn't mention the rifle. They didn't need to. The reporter described it anyway. The weapon bore faint pink markings, shaped like flowers. Back in Virginia, Tors found the article. He showed it to Dunham, who read it twice before setting it down. She's still out there. Tors nodded, doing what she always did. Fighting. No, Tors said quietly, protecting. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Ryan sat on a rooftop overlooking a camp lit by lanterns and quiet laughter. Children played in the dust below, laughter unbroken by sirens or explosions. Her rifle rested beside her, the roses nearly invisible now beneath layers of desert grime. A medic passed by, smiling. "You're the one who kept them safe tonight, right?" Ryan shook her head. "No, they kept themselves safe. I just made sure the noise didn't reach them." The medic hesitated. "You're not military, are you?" "Not anymore." He looked at her curiously. "Then why stay?" She glanced at the horizon, where the faint outline of destroyed villages glowed under the fatting sun. "Because I left too much of myself in places like this. I can't take it back, but I can make sure no one else leaves theirs." The medic nodded slowly, understanding more than he could say. She smiled, faint, tired, but real. "Besides," she murmured, "they still need someone to remember the roses." That night, as she cleaned her rifle under the stars, her hands paused on the worn petals painted along the barrel. 8 roses. She traced them one by one, whispering the names she'd never said aloud to anyone but the wind. Harper, Singh, Jackson, Tors still alive but distant, Dunham a ghost in uniform, Hayes saved, forgiven but gone his own way. She added one more petal, not for the dead but for herself. For the part of her that had died and been reborn, somewhere between silence and gunfire. Weeks later she received a package. No return address, no sender. Inside, a single note. Handwritten. "For what it's worth, the world still needs people like you. D." Beneath it, a single dog tag. Hayes. She closed her eyes and exhaled, letting the desert wind carry away what little pain remained. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. That night, under a sky scattered with stars and silence, she sat with her rifle across her knees. In the distance, she could hear faint laughter, children, soldiers, survivors, the sound of life continuing despite everything. And maybe, she thought, that was the truest victory of all. Not the shot, not the medal, not the myth. Just the quiet proof that after everything she'd done, and everything she'd lost, some small piece of the world still lived because she refused to stop fighting. Why do some stories end in silence? Not with a bang, not with applause, but with the kind of stillness that feels like truth. The wind moved over the plateau like a whisper. Fine dust rolled along the ridges, the sun glowing low and orange against the endless sky. Corporal Riannan Vex, or what remained of her name, sat on the edge of a broken wall overlooking the refugee camp below. Her hair was longer now, streaked by sun and time. The uniform she once wore had no insignia left, just faded cloth and stitches that held on out of habit. She'd spent years here, not fighting, not retreating, just existing in the in-between. Children ran across the dirt, laughter echoing against old stone. Aid workers moved through the camp like threads of color. She'd become part of the landscape, another quiet protector no one noticed until the danger came. And lately, the danger came less and less. That was how she knew it was almost time. A convoy arrived that afternoon, white trucks with faded emblems and exhausted faces. Among them were soldiers she didn't recognize, but one man she did. Tors. He stepped out of the lead truck, older now, beard flecked with gray. When he saw her, he froze. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he smiled, shaking his head. "You're terrible at disappearing." She laughed softly. "You found me." He shrugged. "I stopped looking, you just showed up again." They sat for a while, watching the camp as dusk fell. "Command thinks you're dead," he said finally. "No one's heard from you in 3 years." "I prefer it that way." He studied her face, the calm in it, the kind that only comes after surviving something that should have ended you. You look different. I feel different, she said. Lighter, maybe. Still carrying the rifle. She nodded toward the pack beside her. Always. He smiled faintly, still painted. Faded, she said, but the roses are still there. That night they ate together by the fire. Tors told her about the world she'd missed, about Dunham retiring quietly, about Hayes re-enlisting and mentoring new snipers, about the plaque they'd put up at Pendleton. It bore her name, or rather the name they'd made for her. The Rose Shooter. No first name, no history, just a legend clean and hollow. They made you immortal, he said. You should see it. She shook her head. I don't need to. Tors looked at her for a long moment. You could come back, you know. You earned that right. Her gaze drifted to the fire. I had my chance to come back. The Corps taught me how to shoot. But this, she gestured toward the camp, the people sleeping under canvas and hope, this taught me why. He didn't press further. Some truths didn't need explanations. Later, when the night grew still and the stars scattered across the black, she walked alone to the edge of the camp. The air was cool, the desert stretched forever. She unfolded a small, weathered notebook, the one she'd carried through every deployment. Inside, names filled the pages. Not just her fallen friends, but civilians she'd met, people she'd saved, people she'd lost track of. At the bottom of the last page, she added a new name. Tors. She smiled, closing it gently, not as an ending but as a circle. The next morning came with noise. Gunfire distant, faint but real. Tors ran up the ridge, rifle in hand. Perimeter patrol says movement east ridge. Ryan grabbed her pack. Civilians. No fighters, maybe a dozen. She climbed to the high point overlooking the valley. Through her scope, she saw them, silhouettes moving fast, armed, reckless. The camp below was exposed. Get the children to the shelters, she ordered. Tors nodded, shouting down the orders. Ryan settled behind her rifle, the same one she'd carried through a dozen lifetimes. The scope was scratched, the barrel pitted, but it still felt alive in her hands. The wind was light, moving east to west. Distance 2,000, elevation stable. Her breathing slowed, the world faded into focus. One shot. Then another. Then another. Each round hit like punctuation in a sentence she'd been writing for years. The last fighter fell before he reached the ridge line. When it was over, she stayed prone for a long moment, cheek against the stock, eyes steady through the glass. Then she lowered the rifle and exhaled. Tors approached quietly. You still got it, he said softly. She smiled faintly. I never lost it, I just stopped needing to prove it. He nodded. You just saved 50 people. She shook her head. No, I gave them a few more sunsets. What they do with them, that's what matters. That evening the camp threw together a meal, rice, canned meat, laughter. For once, the air didn't taste of smoke or fear. Tors found her sitting apart again, watching the horizon. You know, he said gently, you could stay this time, permanently. Build something that isn't made of sand and memories. She smiled. Maybe I already have. He looked around the camp, at the kids chasing each other, at the women tending small fires. Yeah, he said, maybe you have. They sat in silence, the kind that didn't feel heavy anymore. After a while she said quietly, do you ever think about them, the ones we lost? Every day, he said. Me too, she whispered. But lately it feels less like mourning and more like remembering. He nodded. That's how healing starts. She smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe it's how it ends. Days turned to weeks. Tors eventually left back to the Corps, back to the structure he still needed. He hugged her before he went. You'll always have a place, he said. She nodded, so will you. When his truck disappeared over the ridge, She looked down at her hands, rough, scarred, still steady. Then she picked up the rifle one last time and began to walk. Not toward battle, not away from it, just forward. Through villages rebuilding, through deserts learning to bloom again, through places where the sound of laughter was stronger than the echo of gunfire. Everywhere she went, people remembered her not by name but by what she left behind. A rifle, a symbol, a single rose painted on metal. Years later, at a small marine museum in Quantico, a curator noticed something strange. The display case holding the rose rifle was empty. No sign of forced entry, no security breach, just gone. They never found it. But months after, aid convoys along the Syrian border reported the same rumor, a distant shot in the night, precise and silent. Camps attacked by raiders suddenly spared. Witnesses described a figure on the ridgeline, faded uniform, long hair, rifle with pink markings. No one ever caught her, no one ever needed to. Because somewhere in that silence, in that small flicker of mercy, people started to believe again that maybe not all wars were fought for nations. Some were fought for the small, stubborn hope that beauty could still survive inside brutality. One evening, an old Marine named Dunham stood at the memorial wall at Camp Pendleton. His hair had gone gray. His uniform hung loose from age and time. He placed a small paper rose beneath the engraved name Riannan Vex, KIA unconfirmed. He didn't know if she was alive. Maybe he didn't need to. He just whispered the words he'd never said back then. Thank you. Far away, under the same sun setting over another horizon, Riannan sat beside a quiet stream. Her rifle lay across her knees. The roses, faded, chipped, almost gone, still caught the last light of day. She traced one with her thumb, smiling softly. There was no noise here, no rank, no orders, no audience. Just peace. And in that peace, for the first time, she finally let go. The ghosts, the metals, the noise. She closed her eyes and breathed. When the wind rose, it carried the sound of distant laughter from the camp below. Children again, safe. She smiled faintly. Because that was enough. Because that was everything. And when she finally stood, slinging her rifle over her shoulder, the roses gleamed for a moment in the last golden light, a reminder that even in the ugliest places on earth, something fragile could still survive. Because sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.